Hello, law students. This is Jonathan Lipson with The Real Deal on Contracts. Today we're going to continue our discussion about exit and restitution, focusing mostly on restitution. We'll talk about three things. Number one, what are restitutionary remedies? Number two, when are they available? And number three, how do these remedies differ from the expectation and reliance measures of damages you've seen so far? Number one, what are restitutionary remedies? Well, essentially, they fall into one of two related categories, either quantum meruit, it's law of Latin, or unjust enrichment. As a general proposition, I think that these are equitable remedies that courts will award as justice requires. That's a key phrase, as justice requires, and that focus on the benefits that have been conferred by one party on the other. And they will use them when it appears to them that other remedies at law, like expectation and reliance, are unjust or not going to be adequate for some reason. The Restatement Second of Contracts, Section 371, I think lays it up fairly intuitively. If a sum of money is awarded to protect a party's restitution interest, it says it may, as justice requires, be measured either A, by the reasonable value to the other party, that's sort of the defendant, of what he received, could be she, in terms of what it would have cost him to obtain it from a person in the claimant's position, or B, extent to which the other party's property has been increased in value or his other interests advanced. So the first, sometimes you can think of as more closely aligned to quantum meruit. What's the fair value of what it would have cost the beneficiary to have acquired whatever was received in the open market. The other, unjust enrichment, is, well, what is the actual increase in value to the beneficiary? Number two, when are these remedies available? Quantum meruit, the court in the Paffhausen case tells us, involves recovery for services or materials provided under an implied contract. You might say, well, what's an implied contract? We don't really even know what a contract is yet because we haven't gotten to the units on it formation. But you'll see that there are some technicalities involved in order for a court to conclude that, yes, indeed, a contract has been formed. You don't have to worry about what those are yet, but know that if it looks like the parties were trying to create a contract, but for some reason there wasn't one technically. For example, there was supposed to be a writing and there wasn't, as in Paffhausen. But everything else sort of looks like there was a promissory relationship. Courts might say, well, that contract was implied, in fact, by the conduct of the parties. And so we are going to look at quantum meruit as a remedy. The test that they give us in Paffhausen, I think, is fairly straightforward. Three elements. Number one, services were rendered to the defendant by the plaintiff. Number two, with the knowledge and the consent of the defendant. And number three, under circumstances that make it reasonable for the plaintiff to expect payment. That's quantum meruit. Unjust enrichment, I think, by contrast, really focuses on the benefit retained by the beneficiary when there's no necessary contractual relationship at all. But, as the Paffhausen court says, on the grounds of fairness and justice, law compels performance of a legal and moral duty to pay. The damages analysis in that case is based not on the implied contract, but instead on principles of equity. So quantum meruit, unjust enrichment, court in Paffhausen tries to distinguish these two, and it's not that hard in general to see the distinction, but in practice they can sometimes overlap. Number three, how do these differ from the expectation and reliance measures of recovery we've seen so far? Well, at least five things come to mind. Number one, right, the claimant in restitution is generally not going to get lost profit as they would in expectation. Number two, the restitutionary remedy is only going to involve value or money or what have you exchanged between the two parties, the plaintiff and the defendant, buyer and seller, what have you. That's different from reliance, where any reasonable out-of-pocket expenditure, even to a third party, can be recovered from the breaching defendant. Right? That's exactly what you saw in Security Stove. Security Stove went out of pocket in reliance on the contract, buying a train ticket and a hotel room and what have you. That was not a benefit conferred on American Railway Express. But nevertheless, American Railway Express was liable in reliance to pay that to Security Stove. So distinction in who the payments or value goes to as between restitution and reliance. Number 3, restitution avoids the loser contract problem that we talked about in connection with L. Albert. The hand limitation does not apply, so that, as you'll see in the Algernon Blair case, even if you have a claimant who might have been a loser under the contract in performance, where justice requires a restitutionary remedy, they can recover the benefit conferred or value retained, as you'll see there. Number 4, the kind of overarching limit here is as justice requires. That's obviously quite different from reliance and expectation, which tend to be much more formulaic and really not concerned so much about justice at all. Given our concern about predictability as an overarching theme in contract, you can imagine that courts are reluctant to award restitutionary remedies, except in extreme cases. It's just hard to predict when justice is going to require something other than expectation or reliance. So courts, I think, are cautious about it. Number 5, restitutionary remedies are available to the breacher as well as the non-breacher. Right? In expectation and reliance, the non-breacher is obviously the only party that can recover. Breacher can't. Restitution is different. So, for example, as you saw in Neary v. Retail Marine, Mr. Neary breached. He was trying to get his security deposit back. He should have gotten it back, or he would have gotten it back, except to the extent that Retail Marine was able to show that they were damaged in the profit plus way that a loss volume seller might be. So, final point, right? Breachers can get restitution just as can non-breachers. That is the real deal on restitution. We'll pick up with subjective damages in our next unit.